This is Unvarnished, the Bible in the Raw. Gene, the journeyman Strother, has described himself as preacher, pauper, president. He has lived on both sides of the tracks and brings a one-of-a-kind perspective and style to Bible preaching and teaching. Gene continues the series Pride and Prejudice. It is based on Proverbs 6, verses 16 through 19, which reveal 7 things God hates. Today's sermon is Fast and Furious. In the fury of our fast-paced, adrenaline-driven environment, how do we strike a balance between urgency and patience? What if we get it wrong? What if we get it right? Get ready for the unvarnished truth. Now, here is your host, Gene Strother.
The Crucible, the Fiery Trials. This is Sermon 6 in the Pride and Prejudice sermon series. For our scripture reading, I want to pull the text from the old King James Bible, the version I was raised on, and the precise language in which I committed to memory Proverbs chapter 6 decades ago. Verses 16 to 19, this has been our text for the entirety of this series. These 6 things doth the Lord hate, yea, 7 are an abomination unto him: a proud look, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked imaginations, feet that be swift in running to mischief, a false witness that speaketh lies, and he that soweth discord among brethren. Again, that's verses 16 to 19 in Proverbs chapter 6. So today we're focusing on the false witness who speaks lies. One thing comes crystal clear in Solomon's list, and that is this: God does not like dishonesty. We've already addressed the lying tongue in Sermon 2, a devious and deviant heart in Sermon 4, dealing with mischief in Sermon 5, and now we have this, a false witness speaking lies. Now, this is a different kind of lie. It's not a lie necessarily designed to cover up one's own misdeeds, though it often does serve that purpose in a secondary manner. Instead, it is a lie propagated to accuse the innocent of bad behavior. We call it slander in the courts of popular opinion. In court, it's called libel. So let's start here. What is a crucible? It's not a word we run across every day, and some may be unfamiliar with it. Some may be confused by it. I thought I fully understood the word. I mostly did, but I was missing an important part of its use that I either had no idea about or forgot all about until I dove into it for this sermon. First, there is the meaning of the word as a metaphor. Oxford Dictionary, being the English language standard, I turned there for the definition. And the first one it gives is exactly the one I would have picked. It says that a crucible is a place or situation in which people or ideas are tested severely, often creating something new or exciting in the process. That's the metaphorical meaning of the word. But there is a literal, a more scientific definition, and it existed first. And it was because of this definition that it was adopted for the secondary. So the primary definition is a pot or vessel made of a highly refractory material like porcelain, clay, or graphite, used to melt or calcine metals and minerals. To melt or calcine metals and minerals. The crucible melts down a substance to separate the pure elements from the waste. One of the examples Oxford Dictionary gives of a crucible as a metaphor is an alliance forged in the crucible of war. We go back to World War II, and we had the Axis powers, and we had the Allied powers. And these were in some cases uncomfortable alliances that were formed in the crucible, in the melting pot. And so you had on one side of that war Germany and Japan, each having their own agendas that may have somewhat complemented one another, but not entirely. And then you had on the other side, you had Great Britain and America. France, was being overrun and overwhelmed by Germany. But then you had Russia, who was the ideological opponent of the rest of the Western powers. So it was an alliance forged in the crucible, in the melting pot of war. So a crucible could well be described then as a trial by fire. Suffice it to say, it's not a comfortable place to be. In our text, we're dealing with slander, or the spreading of gossip in order to destroy a person, to wreck their reputation, to crater their career, to ruin their lives. The crucible in American history, I've been naming each of these sermons after a movie or a book. The Crucible was a play, and then it became a movie. It was written by Arthur Miller, and it was around the infamous Salem witch hunts that resulted in the execution of women accused of being witches. It was a dark chapter in American history, and it became a cautionary tale for all of us. In Miller's play, Abigail Williams and her gang of women used false accusations of witchcraft, not just to cover up their own bad behavior, but to exact personal revenge, eliminate rivals, and seize power in the community. They weaponize the legal system through perjury. They take the stand and lie in the accusation of their opponents being witches. It was a horrifying tale of petty jealousies and personal vendettas fueling slander and murder by proxy. But the Crucible's not just relegated to that little isolated incident in Massachusetts all those centuries ago. It's repeated again and again. And in the age of online character assassinations, the furnace has been turned up to maximum temperature. If we think about the crucible in the internet age, I think one of the most startling or stark examples was Justine Sacco. There was a social media crucible, and you may or may not remember her name or the story, but it's from 2013, Justine Sacco. It's the quintessential story of a digital witch hunt. And this was the incident. Justine Sacco, a PR executive, was boarding a flight to South Africa. Before taking off, she tweeted a very insensitive, poorly constructed joke to her 170 followers. She tweeted this: "Going to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS. Just kidding, I'm white." Boy, that's a tough one right there. She then turned off her phone and was on an 11-hour flight to South Africa. But then the witch hunt was on. While she was in the air, the tweet was picked up by a major tech blog, and it went violently viral. A hashtag was created that was the hashtag "Has Justine landed yet?" Hashtag "Has Justine landed yet?" So there's all this furor and the use of this hashtag that just erupts on the internet while she's in the air with her phone turned off, completely unaware of the firestorm she created. And this begins to trend, not just in America, but worldwide. Millions of people are eagerly tracking her flight and reveling in the anticipation of her life falling apart when she lands. The devastation was this: by the time she landed, she was the #1 worldwide trend on Twitter. She was fired from her job immediately, her family was harassed, and she became a global pariah overnight. A man named John Ronson, an author, later wrote about her in his book, which he titled "So You've Been Publicly Shamed." And he highlighted how the modern internet acts as a global Salem, eagerly destroying a person's entire life over a single, often out of context, misstep. One mistake, and you're toast. Then there was another example going back even a little further to 2006. It's hard to believe it's already been 20 years ago, but you may remember the Duke lacrosse case, the sports crucible. It demonstrated how a powerful leader, in this case a corrupt prosecutor, can weaponize perjury for personal gain, allowing a community's prejudices to destroy innocent lives. 3 members of the Duke University men's lacrosse team were accused of rape by an exotic dancer hired for a team party. Now, when I say 3 members of the Duke University's men's lacrosse team, you automatically think privilege, right? You automatically think, well, here are the sons of wealthy people. They're going to Duke, number one, and they're playing lacrosse. I mean, who plays lacrosse who isn't somewhat well off? But then there's this witch hunt. The local prosecutor, whose name is Mike Nifong, was in a tight re-election campaign. He seized the narrative once it came out, and he played the hype game with the press, and he peddled lies for political currency, and he was trying the boys in social media and in the papers, in media in general, in the court of public opinion, before the case ever went to trial. The university suspended the season for the team, forced the head coach, who was a beloved head coach, to resign, and faculty members signed public letters condemning the students. The national media painted the boys as the ultimate villains of privilege and abuse. Easy targets. Who isn't ready to see them get theirs? We see it every day, right? We see an entire political party play on that theme. Encourage rage and jealousy. So this is the perfect storm for these boys. Then comes the devastation. The entire case was a fabrication. DNA evidence cleared the boys, cleared them. And the accuser's story completely unraveled. The state attorney general, ultimately, the attorney general, the one who is tasked with putting them behind bars if that's where they belong, he ultimately declared the players innocent, which is more than just not guilty, by the way. You can say not guilty and not be innocent. He declared them innocent. And Mike Nifong was disbarred and jailed for his corrupt handling of the case. However, the young men spent a year receiving death threats, having their names dragged through the mud globally, and facing the prospect of decades in prison for a crime, not only that they did not commit, but a crime that never even happened. The Crucible. Let's talk about the Crucible and the Christian. It is a difficult but undeniable fact that the believer will be tried by fire. The kind of fire the crucible represents, the kind of fire that separates the pure from the waste. And there are a couple of reasons for this. The first one being the purification of character. Purification of character. The best example, the classic example of this, as you might imagine, is Job. He's the classic example of a believer in the fires of tribulation. The hard thing about that, the curtain is drawn back for the reader. We know that God put Job up for testing by Satan. God not only allowed it, he arranged it. He orchestrated it. He said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job?" These are hard words. These are hard words for you to get your brain around, for me to get mine around. But Job endured the coming trials, all the losses of his children dying and his business going to pot and his wife leaving him and all the things that happened to him over the course of the next few months. And he became the prime example. Job became the prime example of unyielding faith in extreme trials. And famously, Job said in Job chapter 23, verse 10, and it's a long, hard road from Job chapter 1 to chapter 23. Believe me, there's a lot in it, a lot of suffering, a lot of accusations, a lot of finger pointing in Job's face by his own friends. But finally, in Job 23:10, he says, God knows the way that I take. He knows my heart. When he has tried me, I shall come out as gold. That wasn't just defiance of his against the accusations. He wasn't just waving his fist in his so-called friends' faces. He was making a statement of faith. When God has tried me, I'll come out as gold. I may be in the crucible now, but there's a reason for it. Basically, he's saying God knows my heart. He's not trying to destroy me. He's purifying me like gold. Then we have the testimony of King David. You see, King David recognized the hand of God, even in the tribulations of his people. In Psalm chapter 66, verses 10 to 12, he says, for you, O God, have tested us. You have tried us as silver is tried. You have brought us into the net. You laid a crushing burden on our backs. You let men ride over our heads. We went through fire and through water, yet you have brought us out to a place of abundance. So, the first reason is for the purification of character. And the second reason that Christians go through the crucible or in the crucible is for the trial of faith. Trials not only reveal and refine character, they test and strengthen faith. If I have no trials, if I have no troubles, nothing I cannot work out in my own mind and with my own strength, then what do I need with faith, really? Peter, the Apostle Peter writes in 1 Peter 4, verses 12 to 13, Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice insofar as you share Christ's suffering, that you may also rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed. Peter understood as well as anyone the trials of faith and faithfulness. He failed the first few major tests, didn't he? Sure he did. But the fire was a refining fire, not a raging fire of destruction. And over time, through these trials, Peter became less impulsive, less unstable, and he emerged ultimately as a powerful leader in the Christian faith movement. Faith, that was where he had to grow. He needed to learn to trust and obey. Obeying is hard when there's no trust. He learned to trust Jesus rather than his own impulses and instincts, and Peter became a rock of stability for Jesus Christ in this world. So what's our conclusion today? On the one hand, we have the slanderous words of men and women hell-bent on dogpiling, not caring that the life they shatter is as much their own as the one they target. Hear that. The life they shatter is as much their own as the one they target. On the other, we have Christians in the crosshairs of the wicked one and his forces, but also in the crucible designed by God and meant for purification, sanctification, trial by fire, not to destroy, but to purify, ultimately to glorify the one tried. So we're left here today with two basic instructions, and here they are. Number one, don't slander others. Don't seek the destruction of the exposed, the weakened, the vulnerable. God hates that. He doesn't need you to see that they pay. He doesn't need you to see that they get theirs. It says so right there in the Bible. This is fire, and it's the wildfire of hell. Don't slander others. Don't dogpile. Number two, don't misunderstand the crucible when you are in it. Whew. Man, it's a hard place. The fire of God is purifying. When I was a boy preacher, I'd hear how certain people, icons of the faith, like men like D.L. Moody or Billy Sunday, they would say that they were men on fire for God, on fire for God. It was such a common phrase. But I failed to understand then the implications of fire, the danger of it. My cousin's son recently spent well more than a year in the hospital without being released with second and third degree burns over 80% of his body due to an accident, a fiery accident. I saw firsthand what fire can do. I also saw how it refined and purified the character and faith, not only of this man, but of his parents and his siblings, his surrounding family. Fire can be destructive, but it can also be instructive. It can be refining, purifying. So let's let Peter have the last word here today, okay? I cannot say it better or with more authority than he in the first place. So I'm going to go back to chapter 4, 1 Peter, and here's some selected verses. It's 19 verses, but I'm not going to read all of them. Therefore, since Christ suffered in his own body, he writes, arm yourselves with the same resolve, because anyone who has suffered in his body is done with sin. Consequently, he does not live out his remaining time on earth for human passions, but for the will of God. For you have spent enough time in the past carrying out the same desires as the Gentiles, living in debauchery, lust, drunkenness, orgies, carousing, and detestable idolatry. The end of all things is near. Therefore be clear-minded and sober so that you can pray. Above all, love one another deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. Show hospitality to one another without complaining. Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial that has come upon you, as though something strange were happening to you, but rejoice that you share in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed at the revelation of his glory. If you're insulted for the name of Christ, you're blessed, because the Spirit of glory and of God rests on you. Indeed, none of you should suffer as a murderer or thief or wrongdoer or even as a meddler. But if you suffer as a Christian, do not be ashamed, but glorify God that you bear that name. For it is time for judgment to begin with the family of God. And if it begins with us, what will the outcome be for those who disobey the gospel of God? So then, those who suffer according to God's will should entrust their souls to their faithful Creator and continue to do good. My name is Gene. Some call me preacher. Next week, we're going to conclude this 7-sermon series called Pride and Prejudice with one final sermon, East of Eden. I hope you'll join me for it.